The NBA trade deadline is just 15 days away. Yes, I'm counting the days, sue me. Even though I don't know why, because the closer and closer we get to the deadline, the more apparent it's becoming that the Bulls are likely going to be doing nothing. But that said though, a lot can happen between now and February 8th in terms of players becoming available, teams growing more and more desperate, other trades being made that could have a domino effect on other players who are on the trade block. And so I think for Bulls fans, we're all kind of wondering, what is Zach Lavine's trade value? We keep hearing that there's no market for Zach, but with some of the most recent trades, you can kind of start to get an idea of what his potential value could look like in a deal. But is it enough that would make the Bulls front office pull the trigger or wait for a later time when Zach's value is in a better place? Well, let's talk about it further. But first, we got the Bulls playing the Lakers tomorrow. Always one of those games that even when the Lakers are bad, it's going to be a big game to watch and a critical game for the Bulls after suffering that crushing loss against the Phoenix Suns. But regardless, you guys know I like making predictions on games and player stats. If that's something you enjoy doing too and you want to land some free money while doing it, then you're going to want to hear about this offer from Underdog Fantasy. For those that aren't familiar with Underdog, let me tell you about the app and my personal favorite that I use on the app, NBA Pick'ems. With Pick'ems, you can pick higher or lower on most players' stats and win money based on the ones you get right. You pick higher or lower and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night if you do 5 pick'ems and you get them all right. If you think Vucevic is going to score more than 16 points against the Lakers, select higher and you can win some money. And guys, they're offering viewers of this channel an exclusive offer. If you use the promo code BULLCENTRAL, you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Who doesn't want free money? Really, it's that simple. It's also a great way to support the channel as well. Leave a link to the site and the code in the description if you're interested, and let me know what picks you guys end up making. Now, as I'm sure you've all seen by now, we had a recent trade in which the Miami Heat acquired Terry Rozier from the Charlotte Hornets in a deal where they sent Kyle Lowry and a first-round pick to Charlotte. I did a video breaking down this trade on the second channel and One Hoops. Check it out if you're interested. But while this trade may seem insignificant as it relates to the Bulls anyway, this kind of gives you a sense on how you can measure Zach Lavine's trade value. I know some will say, well, what about Pascal Siakam in that deal? The Raptors got 3 first-round picks for Siakam on an expiring contract, but the Siakam trade deal, while it was significant, I really don't think you can use that as a comparison or a barometer for Zach Lavine, because Siakam is on an expiring contract. The Pacers, I'm sure, got assurances that he would re-sign with him given how much they actually traded to get him. And let's be real, Siakam is a better player than Zach Lavine. But for Terry Rozier, who in my view, Zach is a better player and has proven to be a better player for some time. I know Rozier is having a career year, and side by side, putting their numbers together, they look better than Zach. But as I said on the other channel, Rozier's numbers are a bit inflated. When he's playing on a very bad team in which their best player has missed significant time, and Rozier has been given the green light on offense as the team's primary scoring option, yeah, he's not going to be averaging over 23 points per game and 18 shots in Miami. His role is going to be significantly reduced. But the reason Rozier is a good gauge to measure Zach Lavine's trade value is because, like Lavine, it's not a situation of a player on an expiring deal. Rozier has a lot of guaranteed money coming to him, not as much as Zach, but Rozier does still have 2 years left on his contract where he's going to be making $25 million and $26.6 million respectively in those following 2 seasons. Again, not as much as Zach, but by trading Rozier, you're committing to him for the long-term money on your books, which under the new CBA, teams have to be much more mindful of when thinking of their payroll long-term with the new luxury tax aprons, and whether you're going to be able to afford said player down the road, or whether it'll be a tradable contract down the line should you need to pivot in another direction. I mean, really, and I'll likely have to make a separate video on this topic, but the new CBA rules is what is killing Zach Lavine's trade value, because teams are now reluctant to take on big contracts, especially for players who are fringe-level all-stars, because teams are now disincentivized to spend big money going well over the luxury tax. But again, I'll save that topic for a different day. But regardless, what the Hornets got for Terry Rozier in this trade with the Heat should give you some indication of Lavine's trade value. It's a longer-term contract. Lavine still has 3 years left on his deal after the season, Rozier just 2. The players are about the same age. In fact, Rozier is actually a year older than Zach at 29. For both players, they're high-level offensive guys who can score in a hurry, but at times can be pretty inconsistent. Both players aren't great defenders, but as I said, despite the great season Rozier is having, Zach Lavine is still the better player, a much more efficient player on offense, bigger bodied, more athletic finisher. I mean, really, it's almost kind of nonsense when you think about comparing Terry Rozier to Zach Lavine side by side, but that's where we are right now when assessing Zach's value because he's having a down season. Not scoring the ball as well as we're used to seeing, not as efficient as his usual numbers would indicate, and more importantly, he hasn't been healthy this year, which is killing his trade value. Also doesn't help that Zach Lavine and his attitude, demeanor, the fact that he quit on this team earlier on in the season, that certainly never helps a player's trade value and the leverage the Bulls might have in making a deal work when teams know the Bulls are trying to get rid of him or that Zach wants out. And look, at the end of the day, what makes trading Zach Lavine so difficult is matching the salary. Zach is making $40 million this year. Finding a player or players to take back in a deal and finding the right players that are, one, available in a trade. This isn't a situation where you just trade him for other league superstars who are making that kind of money when they're untouchable on their current teams. But two, for the Bulls in making a trade, they're also focused in taking on shorter term contracts or even expiring money because they know they need to free up cap space, especially if they're going to be looking to re-sign Patrick Williams to a longer term deal and potentially, yes, potentially, even DeMar DeRozan, who the Bulls have been incredibly high on since day one and value his veteran leadership on the roster. And so because of this, the Bulls are rather limited in terms of the type of player/contracts they can take back in a deal. You're talking expiring contracts for players like Gordon Hayward, Klay Thompson, I guess now even potentially Kyle Lowry after getting moved to the Hornets, even though I think that's most likely going to be a buyout situation. Maybe even a Tobias Harris, but regardless, you kind of see why trading Zach Lavine is easier said than done because one, teams are hesitant to take on his contract. He has this negative perception around the league, whether it's fair or not, that he's not a winning player or that his game doesn't impact winning, and the injuries so far this season are also not helping. But here's the thing, if Terry Rozier, a player who still has a fair amount of money on his contract, a player in my view isn't as good as Zach Lavine because you also have to take into account a player's history and not just looking at this season in isolation, and a player who I don't consider to be a winning player, it's not like his game has really impacted winning for the Hornets, if he can land you at least one first round pick, even if it's likely going to be a late first rounder and an expiring contract, then why can't Zach Lavine return that much in a trade? You can't sit there and tell me that Zach's contract is that much of a net negative than a player like Terry Rozier. I get it. The thought process is, well, why can't you go after someone who is maybe 80 to 85% of what Zach gives you in terms of production, but at 70% or even half the cost in terms of the money owed to Zach? But even with that, for the Bulls, if they're really serious about moving on from Zach Lavine, they should at a minimum be able to get a first round pick in a deal while taking on an expiring contract, even if it's a future first well out into the future. Because as we get closer to the trade deadline, you're going to see teams that are trying to win now get a little more desperate and are going to be in the market for a third or fourth level scoring option, maybe even a second option on some nights. And while Zach is a pretty expensive third option, if a team believes that's all they need to get themselves over the hump, they'll sacrifice a pick to take a chance on Lavine, just as the Heat have done with Terry Rozier. So I guess in short, you can't sit here and tell me there is zero market for Zach Lavine if even a player like Terry Rozier can net you a first round pick. Let me know what you guys think though. How do you think this most recent trade impacts Zach's trade value? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.